Jake Morrison pressed his face against the cold metal of the observation window and watched the last transport ship disappear into the black void of space. The red warning lights flashed across Research Station Omega-7 as the automated systems sealed every exit. He was trapped now, along with Dr. Lisa Carter and their alien guest Zara. The lockdown would last at least 6 weeks, maybe longer depending on how fast the scientists back on Earth could find a cure for the alien virus that had started spreading. Through the outer colonies, the station felt different now with only 3 beings aboard, instead of the usual 47 crew members. Every sound echoed louder in the empty corridors. Every breath seemed to carry more weight. Jake had volunteered to stay behind because someone needed to keep the station running, and his military training made him the obvious choice. He knew how to handle isolation, how to maintain complex systems, and how to stay calm when things went wrong. Lisa Carter had stayed because she refused to abandon her research. She had been working with the Thermalian species for 2 years, building trust and understanding with beings that looked like large cats but thought like advanced scientists. Zara was her primary subject, a female Thermalian who served as cultural liaison between her people and the human research teams. Lisa believed her work was too important to pause, even for a deadly pandemic. Jake walked through the main corridor toward the command center, his boots making soft thuds on the metal floor. The station hummed around him with the constant noise of air recyclers, gravity generators, and power systems. He had spent the last 3 hours checking every system twice, making sure everything would run smoothly during the lockdown. The automated systems were good, but they needed human oversight to catch problems before they became disasters. The command center was a circular room, filled with screens and control panels. Jake sat in the central chair and pulled up the station status report. Power levels were stable, life support was running at optimal efficiency, and the quarantine barriers were functioning perfectly. Everything looked normal, but Jake knew that normal could change very quickly in space. He heard footsteps in the corridor and turned to see Lisa approaching with a datapad in her hands. She looked tired but determined, her brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and her lab coat wrinkled from long hours of work. Behind her walked Zara, moving with the fluid grace that all Thermalians possessed. Zara stood about 6 feet, tall with golden fur that seemed to shimmer under the station lights. Her large green eyes held an intelligence that sometimes made Jake forget he was looking at an alien. "How are the systems holding up?" Lisa asked as she entered the command center. "Everything is running smooth," Jake replied, gesturing to the screens around them. "We have enough power, food, and water to last 3 months if needed. The communication array is working fine, so we can stay in contact with Earth and the other colonies." Lisa nodded and made notes on her datapad. "Zara and I will be in the research lab most of the time. We want to use this isolation period to dive deeper into Thermalian cultural studies. This might be the perfect opportunity to understand their society better without the usual interruptions." Jake looked at Zara, who had been quietly observing their conversation. She understood English perfectly but rarely spoke unless directly asked. Her people were naturally reserved around humans, preferring to observe and learn rather than engage in small talk. "Is there anything you need from me?" Jake asked Zara directly. Zara tilted her head slightly, a gesture that Jake had learned meant. She was thinking carefully about her response. "The station feels different now," she said in her soft, melodic voice. Quieter, more intimate. Jake felt a slight unease at her choice of words but dismissed it. Thermalians often struggled with English expressions, sometimes choosing words that carried meanings they did not intend. "It will take some getting used to," he agreed. "But we will manage fine," Lisa smiled and patted Zara's shoulder. "We should let Jake get back to his work. We have our own research to focus on." The 2 females left the command center, their voices fading as they walked toward the research section of the station. Jake turned back to his screens and began running diagnostics on the life support systems. The work was routine but necessary. In space, routine maintenance was the difference between life and death. Hours passed as Jake worked his way through the station's various systems. He checked the power generators, tested the backup systems, and verified that the emergency protocols were functioning correctly. The station was designed to run with minimal human intervention, but Jake believed in being thorough. His military training had taught him that preparation prevented problems. As he worked, Jake found his thoughts drifting to his two companions. Lisa was brilliant and dedicated, but she sometimes got so focused on her research that she forgot about practical concerns. Zara was harder to read. Her alien nature made it difficult to understand her motivations and emotions. Jake had worked with her for months, but he still felt like he was only seeing the surface of her personality. The station's day cycle began to wind down as the lights dimmed to simulate evening. Jake made his final rounds, checking the security systems and making sure all the critical areas were properly sealed. The quarantine protocols were strict, and any breach could expose them to the virus that was ravaging the outer colonies. As he walked past the research lab, Jake could hear Lisa and Zara talking quietly inside. Their voices carried a tone of deep concentration, and Jake knew they were probably discussing some aspect of Thermalian culture that he would never fully understand. He had great respect for Lisa's work, but he preferred dealing with things he could fix with tools and technical knowledge. Jake returned to his quarters, a small but comfortable room with a bed, desk, and personal storage unit. He had decorated it with a few photos from Earth and some books that he enjoyed reading during his free time. The lockdown would give him plenty of opportunity to catch up on his reading. Before settling in for the night, Jake checked the communication system one final time. The messages from Earth were routine updates about the virus outbreak and instructions for maintaining the quarantine. Nothing had changed in the last few hours, which was both reassuring and frustrating. Jake wanted to know when they would be able to leave the station, but the scientists back home were still working on finding a cure. He closed the communication channel and prepared for sleep, unaware that the next few weeks would challenge everything. He thought he knew about alien biology, human adaptation, and the unexpected connections that could form between different species under extreme circumstances. 3 days into the lockdown, Jake noticed something strange about Zara. She had always been quiet and careful in her movements, but now she seemed restless. She would pace the corridors at odd hours, and when Jake passed her in the hallways, she would stop and watch him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Lisa was, too, busy with her research to notice the changes at first. She spent most of her time in the lab, analyzing data and preparing reports about Thermalian culture. Jake tried to focus on his own work, but he kept running into Zara in places where he had never seen her before. She would be standing near the engineering section when he went to check the power systems, or waiting by the communications center when he needed to send his daily reports to Earth. By the end of the first week, Jake could not ignore what was happening. Zara's behavior was becoming more aggressive and direct. She would stand closer to him when they talked, and her voice had taken on a different quality that Jake could not quite describe. It was deeper somehow, more musical but also more urgent. The first real sign of trouble came when Jake was working in the main corridor, replacing a faulty circuit panel. He was focused on the delicate wiring when he became aware of a strange smell in the air. It was sweet and musky, unlike anything he had encountered before. The scent seemed to fill his nostrils and make his head feel light. Jake looked up from his work and saw Zara standing a few feet away, watching him intently. Her golden fur seemed to shimmer more brightly than usual, and her large green eyes held a look that made Jake's heart beat faster. He tried to concentrate on his repair work, but the strange smell was making it difficult to think clearly. "Are you feeling well?" Jake asked, setting down his tools and standing up. Zara moved closer, and Jake noticed that her body temperature seemed higher than normal. Heat radiated from her fur, and he could see that she was breathing more rapidly than usual. "I feel different," she said softly, changed. Jake felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. The sweet smell was stronger now, and he had to grip the wall to steady himself. "Maybe you should see Lisa," he suggested. "She might know what is happening." Zara stepped even closer, and Jake could feel the warmth coming from her body. "I do not want to see Lisa," she said. "I want to be near you." Jake's military training kicked in, and he recognized that something was seriously wrong. He had never felt this way before, like his thoughts were becoming fuzzy and his body was responding to signals he did not understand. He needed to get away from Zara and figure out what was happening. "I have work to finish," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We can talk later." He gathered his tools quickly and walked away, but he could feel Zara's eyes following him down the corridor. The strange smell seemed to cling to his clothes and hair, and even after he reached the command center, he could still sense it affecting his ability to concentrate. Jake tried to focus on his routine system checks, but his mind kept drifting. Back to Zara, he found himself thinking about the way she had looked at him, the heat radiating from her body and the urgent quality in her voice. These thoughts were not like his normal professional concerns about station operations and crew welfare. An hour later, Lisa burst into the command center with her datapad in hand and a worried expression on her face. "Jake, I need to talk to you about Zara," she said breathlessly. "What about her?" Jake asked, grateful for the distraction from his confused thoughts. Lisa pulled up a chair and sat down across from him. "I have been reviewing the biological data we collected from the Thermalian species, and I think I know what is happening. Zara is entering what her people call the burning time. It is similar to what some Earth animals experience during mating season, but much more intense." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. How intense? "According to my research, Thermalian females go through this cycle once every few years. During this time, their body temperature rises, they release powerful pheromones, and they become focused on finding a suitable mate. The process can last for several weeks." Jake thought about the strange smell he had been detecting and his unusual reactions to being near Zara. "Are you saying that her pheromones are affecting me?" Lisa nodded grimly. "The research suggests that Thermalian pheromones can have a strong effect on other species, including humans. The problem is that we have never had a situation where a human was exposed to these pheromones for an extended period in a closed environment." Jake stood up and began pacing around the command center. "So what do we do? We cannot leave the station and we cannot avoid each other completely." "I am not sure," Lisa admitted. "The research data is limited. Most of the studies were done with thermions in their natural environment, where females in heat would be surrounded by multiple males of their own species. We have never had to deal with a situation like this." As if summoned by their conversation, Zara appeared in the doorway of the command center. She moved with a fluid grace that seemed more pronounced than usual, and Jake noticed that the strange, sweet smell immediately filled the room. His head began to feel light again, and he had to grip the back of his chair to maintain his balance. "I heard you talking about me," Zara said, her voice carrying that same urgent quality that Jake had noticed earlier. "I can explain what is happening." Lisa looked at Jake, then back at Zara. "Please help us understand. We want to help you, but we need to know what we are dealing with." Zara stepped into the room, and Jake felt the temperature rise noticeably. "My people call it the fire season," she said. "It comes when we are ready to choose a life partner. The burning inside grows stronger until it finds the right match." Jake swallowed hard. "And you think I'm the right match?" Zara's green eyes locked onto his. "You are the only male here. My body has decided that you are the one." Lisa looked between them with growing concern. "Zara, Jake is human. We are different species with different biology. This cannot work the way your instincts are telling you it should." "My instincts do not care about species," Zara replied. "They only care about finding strength, intelligence, and compatibility. Jake has all of these qualities." Jake felt another wave of dizziness and realized that staying in the same room with Zara was becoming dangerous. The pheromones were affecting his judgment, and he could feel his usual logical thinking becoming clouded by urges he did not fully understand. "I need some air," he said, heading for the door, but Zara moved to block his path, her movements quick and purposeful. "Do not run from me, Jake. This is natural. This is right." Jake looked into her eyes and saw something that both thrilled and terrified him. The next few weeks were going to test every bit of his self-control and survival instincts. Jake spent the next 2 hours locked in his quarters, trying to think clearly about the situation. The sweet smell of Zara's pheromones still clung to his clothes and made his thoughts feel fuzzy. He changed into fresh clothes and activated the room's air purification system, hoping to clear his head enough to make a plan. His military training had taught him to approach problems methodically. First, identify the threat. Second, assess available resources. Third, develop a strategy. The threat was clear. Zara's biological drive was affecting his judgment and putting all three of them in a dangerous situation. His resources were limited to the station's systems and his own knowledge of engineering and tactics. Jake pulled up the station's technical manuals on his computer and began studying the environmental control systems. The station recycled air through a complex network of filters and purifiers, but these systems were designed to handle normal atmospheric contaminants, not alien pheromones. He needed to find a way to modify the air circulation to protect himself. From Zara's influence, the first thing Jake did was reprogram the ventilation system in his quarters. He rerouted the air intake to draw from the external recycling units instead of the internal circulation system. This would give him a clean space where he could think without being affected by Zara's pheromones. It was not a perfect solution, but it was a start. Next, Jake began working on the station's temperature controls. He had noticed that Zara's body temperature was much higher than normal during her heat cycle. If he could make certain areas of the station uncomfortably warm or cold, he might be able to discourage her from spending time in those places. It was a crude solution, but Jake was running out of options. He started with the corridor outside. His quarters, raising the temperature to nearly 30 degrees Celsius. Then he modified the air pressure in the engineering section, creating a slight but noticeable change that would make the area feel uncomfortable to someone with sensitive hearing like Zara. These modifications would not stop her completely, but they might buy him time to think of better solutions. Jake's work was interrupted by a soft knocking on his door. He checked the security monitor and saw Lisa standing in the corridor, looking worried. He opened the door but stayed in the doorway, not wanting to venture into the main station where Zara might be waiting. "I have been researching thermalian biology," Lisa said, holding up her datapad. "I think I found something that might help." Jake gestured for her to come into his quarters, and he quickly sealed the door behind her. "What did you find?" Lisa sat down at his desk and pulled up a series of biological charts on her pad. Thermalian heat cycles are triggered by specific environmental factors. Temperature, humidity, air pressure, and even light frequency can all affect the intensity of the cycle. Jake leaned over her shoulder to look at the data. "So if we change the environment, we might be able to reduce the effects?" "Exactly," Lisa said, "but it is more complicated than just adjusting the temperature. Thermalians are sensitive to very specific wavelengths of light. If we can modify the station's lighting system to emit certain frequencies, we might be able to help regulate Zara's condition." Jake nodded and began pulling up the station's lighting controls on his computer. The system was designed to simulate natural day and night cycles, but it could be modified to produce different types of light. "What frequencies do we need?" Lisa showed him a chart on her datapad. "Blue light in the 450 nanometer range seems to have a calming effect on thermalian neural activity. Red light above 650 nanometers can actually make the heat cycle more intense, so we need to avoid that completely." Jake began reprogramming the lighting system, starting with the common areas where Zara spent most of her time. He increased the blue light output and eliminated all red wavelengths. The changes were subtle, but he hoped they would be enough to help Zara regain some control over her condition. While Jake worked on the lighting, Lisa continued reading through her research data. "There is something else," she said after a few minutes. "Thermalian heat cycles are not just about physical attraction. They are also about mental and emotional compatibility. Zara is not just responding to you as a male presence. She is responding to your specific personality traits." Jake paused in his work and looked at Lisa. "What do you mean?" "Thermalians choose life partners based on intelligence, emotional stability, and what they call inner strength. Your calm response to this crisis, your methodical approach to solving problems, and your refusal to take advantage of her vulnerable state are all qualities that her instincts recognize as desirable in a mate. Jake felt a strange mix of pride and concern. So the more I try to handle this situation responsibly, the more attractive I become to her? Lisa nodded. It is a cruel irony. Your best human qualities are exactly what her biology is looking for. In a partner. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft scratching sound at the door. Jake checked the security monitor and saw Zara standing in the corridor, her claws extended and scraping against the metal doorframe. Her golden fur was fluffed up, and her green eyes had a wild look that Jake had never seen before. She has been trying to get in here for the past hour, Lisa whispered. I think your environmental modifications are working, but they are also making her more desperate. Jake watched as Zara pressed her ear against the door, trying to hear what they were saying inside. Her behavior was becoming more animal-like, less controlled than the intelligent being he had worked with for months. The sight filled him with both sympathy and fear. We need a better plan, Jake said quietly. These modifications are just temporary fixes. We need to address the root cause of the problem. Lisa looked at her datapad again. According to my research, thermalian heat cycles usually last between 3 and 6 weeks. The intensity peaks in the middle of the cycle, then gradually decreases. We might be able to wait it out if we can find ways to manage the situation. Jake shook his head. That assumes she does not find a way to overcome our defenses. Zara is intelligent and determined. She will adapt to whatever we do. As if to prove his point, the scratching at the door stopped. Jake checked the security monitor and saw that Zara had disappeared from the corridor. A few minutes later, he heard sounds coming from the ventilation system above their heads. She was trying to find another way into his quarters. Jake looked at Lisa with grim determination. We need to get creative. This is not just about environmental controls anymore. We need to outthink her. The battle of wits between human ingenuity and alien instinct was about to begin in earnest. Jake woke up on the 10th day of the lockdown to find that something had changed. The sweet smell of Zara's pheromones was still present in the air, but it no longer made his head feel fuzzy. His thoughts were clearer and he could think logically about the situation. Without feeling overwhelmed by strange urges, he sat up in his bed and tried to understand what was happening. Over the past few days, he had been exposed to Zara's pheromones almost constantly despite his attempts to filter the air. Instead of making him more vulnerable, the exposure seemed to be having the opposite effect. His body was adapting to the chemical signals, building up a resistance that allowed him to function normally. Jake got dressed and checked his computer for any messages from Earth. The daily reports were routine, but he noticed that his own reports had become more detailed and analytical over the past week. Even while dealing with Zara's condition, he had been maintaining the station better than ever before. His military training had kicked in, and he was performing at a higher level than normal. He opened his door carefully and stepped into the corridor. The station felt different now. The environmental modifications he had made were still in place, but they seemed less important. He could sense Zara's presence nearby, but instead of feeling threatened or confused, he felt calm and alert. Jake found Lisa in the research lab, surrounded by datapads and computer screens. She looked tired but excited, like someone who had just made an important discovery. When she saw him, she smiled and gestured for him to sit down. I have been studying your blood samples, she said, pulling up a series of charts on her main computer. Something remarkable is happening to your body chemistry. Jake looked at the charts but could not make sense of the medical data. What kind of something? Lisa pointed to a graph showing changes in his hormone levels over the past 10 days. Your body is not just adapting to Zara's pheromones. It is learning to process them in a way that enhances your cognitive function instead of impairing it. This is not something I have ever seen before in any species. Jake felt a strange sense of pride at this news. So I am not going crazy? Just, the opposite, Lisa said. Your brain is becoming more efficient at filtering and processing complex chemical information. It is like you are developing a new sense that allows you to understand what Zara is communicating through her pheromones. Before Jake could respond, they heard footsteps in the corridor. Zara appeared in the doorway of the lab, but she looked different than she had in days. Her golden fur was no longer fluffed up in agitation, and her green eyes held a look of curiosity rather than desperate hunger. "May I come in?" she asked politely. Jake looked at Lisa, who nodded. "Of course," he said. Zara entered the lab and sat down across from them. Jake noticed that her presence still affected him, but in a different way than before. Instead of feeling confused or overwhelmed, he felt more aware of everything around him. His senses seemed sharper, and he could pick up subtle details about Zara's mood and intentions. "I owe you both an apology," Zara said. "I have not been behaving like a civilized being. The fire season affects my people strongly, but that is no excuse for making you uncomfortable." Jake was surprised by her calm tone. "You seem different today." Zara tilted her head in that thoughtful gesture that Jake had learned to recognize. "I am different. The intensity of the burning has decreased, but more importantly, I am learning to control it better. Your responses to my condition have been teaching me things about myself that I did not know before." Lisa leaned forward with interest. "What kind of things?" "Jake never tried to dominate me or take advantage of my vulnerable state," Zara said. "He never fled in fear or treated me like a dangerous animal. Instead, he approached the situation like a problem to be solved with intelligence and patience. This is not how males of my species typically respond during fire season." Jake felt a flush of embarrassment. "I was just trying to keep everyone safe." "Exactly," Zara said. "That is what makes you remarkable. Even when my pheromones were affecting your judgment, you maintained your core values. You protected both me and Lisa, even though it would have been easier to give in to the biological urges." Lisa was taking notes on her datapad. "This is fascinating." "Are you saying that Jake's behavior during your heat cycle has influenced how you experience it?" Zara nodded. "Thermalian fire season is not just about physical attraction. It is about finding a life partner who can provide emotional stability and intellectual compatibility. Jake has demonstrated these qualities in ways that go beyond what my instincts were originally seeking." Jake felt a warm sensation in his chest that had nothing to do with pheromones. "So what happens now?" "Now we learn from each other," Zara said. "I want to understand human customs and limitations. You have shown me that different species can find ways to connect that do not require abandoning their own nature." Over the next few hours, the three of them worked together in the lab. Lisa continued her research while Jake and Zara began having conversations about their respective cultures. Jake found that his enhanced sensitivity to Zara's pheromones allowed him to understand her emotional states with remarkable accuracy. He could tell when she was curious, amused, or concerned, even when her words did not make her feelings clear. In return, Zara began sharing insights about Thermalian society that helped Jake understand her perspective on relationships and partnership. She explained that her people formed deep bonds that lasted for life, and that the fire season was their way of ensuring that these bonds were based on true compatibility rather than mere physical attraction. "Your species chooses partners in a very different way," Zara observed. "You rely more on conscious decision-making and less on biological instinct." Jake nodded. "We have instincts too, but we try to balance them with reason and choice." "That is what makes you so interesting," Zara said. "You found a way to honor both your instincts and your values during a very difficult situation." As the day progressed, Jake realized that his relationship with Zara was evolving into something he had never experienced before. It was not romantic in the way humans understood romance, but it was deeper than mere friendship. They were developing a connection that transcended the normal boundaries between species. Lisa watched their interactions with scientific fascination. "You two are creating something entirely new," she said. "This could change how we think about interspecies relationships." Jake looked at Zara and saw that she was smiling, an expression that looked surprisingly natural on her feline features. The crisis that had threatened to destroy their small community was becoming the Foundation for something much more meaningful. The lockdown still had weeks to go, but Jake no longer felt trapped. He felt like he was part of an experiment in cooperation that could benefit both their species for generations to come. The rescue ships arrived on schedule 6 weeks after the lockdown began. Jake stood at the observation window and watched the transport vessels dock with Research Station Omega 7. He felt a strange mix of relief and sadness as he realized that their isolation was coming to an end. Captain Helen Ross was the first person to board the station after the quarantine barriers were lifted. She was a tough military officer who had served with Jake on previous missions. Her expression showed surprise as she looked around the main corridor and saw how well-maintained everything appeared. "Morrison, you look better than I expected," she said, shaking his hand firmly. "We heard reports about the alien heat cycle situation. Command was worried that we might find the station in chaos." Jake smiled and gestured toward the control panels that lined the corridor. "Actually, the station has been running better than ever. We made some improvements to the systems that have increased efficiency across the board." Captain Ross raised an eyebrow. "Improvements? What kind of improvements?" Before Jake could answer, Lisa and Zara appeared from the research lab. Lisa carried a large case filled with data storage devices, and Zara moved with her usual graceful confidence. Captain Ross stared at Zara with obvious curiosity, clearly wondering how the alien had survived the reported crisis. "Captain Ross, this is Dr. Lisa Carter and our cultural liaison Zara," Jake said, making the introductions. "They have been working together on some groundbreaking research during the lockdown." Lisa stepped forward and shook the captain's hand enthusiastically. "Captain, we have made discoveries that will change how humans and Thermalians interact in the future. The data we collected during this isolation period is unlike anything in our previous research." Captain Ross looked between the three of them with growing confusion. "I was told that there was a biological crisis. The report suggested that the aliens' mating cycle had created a dangerous situation." Zara spoke up, her voice calm and confident. "There was a crisis, Captain." But Jake Morrison handled it with remarkable skill and wisdom. Instead of allowing the situation to become destructive, he found ways to turn it into an opportunity for learning and growth. Jake felt embarrassed by the praise, but he could see that Captain Ross was impressed. What exactly happened here? Over the next hour, the three of them explained the events of the past 6 weeks. They described the initial panic when Zara's heat cycle began, Jake's engineering solutions to manage the environmental challenges, and Lisa's research into Thermalian biology. Most importantly, they talked about how the crisis had led to breakthroughs in interspecies communication and cooperation. Captain Ross listened with growing amazement as Jake described the modifications he had made to the station's systems. "You increased power efficiency by 15% just by adjusting the air circulation patterns?" Zara suggested that the original design was fighting against natural air currents, Jake explained. "Her people have a better understanding of fluid dynamics than we realized. By working together, we found ways to make the systems work with the station's environment instead of against it." Lisa pulled out her data pads and showed Captain Ross the research they had completed. "We have documented the first successful long-term interaction between a human and a Thermalian during a biological crisis. The implications for future diplomatic relations are enormous." Captain Ross examined the data with interest. "This is impressive work, but I have to ask about the safety concerns. Were there any incidents that put anyone at risk?" Jake and Zara exchanged a look, and Jake could sense through their enhanced connection that she was amused by the question. "There were challenging moments," Jake admitted. "But we approached them as problems to be solved rather than threats to be feared. That made all the difference." As more rescue personnel boarded the station, word began to spread about what had happened during the lockdown. Scientists from Earth arrived to interview Lisa about her research, and military engineers came to study the improvements that Jake had made to the station systems. Everyone wanted to understand how a potentially dangerous situation had been turned into such a successful collaboration. The most interested visitors were the diplomatic officials who came to speak with Zara. She had become something of a celebrity among the Thermalian community, and her reports about human behavior during the crisis were being studied by leaders on her homeworld. "You have given my people a new understanding of human character," Zara told Jake as they walked through the corridors one last time before departing. "They always respected human intelligence and technology, but now they also respect human wisdom and emotional strength." Jake felt proud but also sad that their unique partnership was coming to an end. What will happen now? Will you continue working with human research teams? Zara smiled, an expression that Jake had learned to read perfectly. Over the past weeks, I have requested a permanent assignment to work with human scientists. Your people have much to teach us about adaptation and problem-solving under pressure. Lisa joined them as they reached the docking bay where the transport ships were waiting. I have been offered a promotion to head the new interspecies relations department, she said excitedly. They want me to develop protocols for handling biological crises in mixed-species environments. That's wonderful, Jake said, genuinely happy for her success. Captain Ross approached them with a serious expression. Morrison, I have new orders for you. Command wants you to lead a team developing emergency protocols for isolated space stations. Your performance during this crisis has impressed a lot of important people. Jake looked around the station that had been his home for the past 6 weeks. What about this place? The station will continue operating as a research facility, Captain, Ross explained. But it will also serve as a training center where humans and aliens can learn to work together in challenging situations. As they prepared to board the transport ships, Jake realized that their experience had created something much larger than any of them had expected. The story of their successful cooperation was already spreading throughout human space and beyond. Other species were requesting information about human crisis management techniques, and several alien governments had proposed joint research projects based on what had happened at Research Station Omega-7. Years later, Jake would look back on those 6 weeks as the most important period of his life. He had discovered that humans possessed a unique ability to adapt to unexpected challenges and find creative solutions that benefited everyone involved. The crisis that could have destroyed their small community had instead become the foundation for a new era of interspecies cooperation. The galaxy had learned an important lesson about human nature when faced with the impossible. Humans did not just survive, they found ways to thrive and bring others along with them. It was a lesson that would influence diplomatic relations for generations to come. As Jake's transport ship pulled away from the station, he could see Zara watching from another vessel. Even across the distance of space, he could sense her gratitude and respect through the connection they had forged during their time together. Their partnership had ended, but the bond they had created would last forever.